Today we have Charlie Cichon, who is the Executive Director of the National Association of Drug Diversion Investigators. Charlie, please tell us about your background and how you became involved and a little bit about NADDI.
Well, I began my background with law enforcement and spent 16 plus years with Baltimore City Police Department and knew absolutely zero about pharmaceutical drugs, abuse, and diversion. I moved over to the regulatory side with the state of Maryland as an investigator and eventually ran the unit that investigated healthcare providers for the state of Maryland for over 16 years. And fortunately, during that period of time, I got involved with NADDI, the National Association of Drug Diversion Investigators. NADDI was founded in Maryland by a pharmaceutical drug diversion unit with the Anne Arundel County Police Department that surrounds Annapolis. So I was fortunate enough to be in the same state where this organization began, and their mission 30 for law enforcement, specifically again for abuse and diversion of pharmaceutical drugs. So I was fortunate to be in Maryland. I was fortunate then to know the founders of NADDI, who worked for Anne Arundel County Police. I became part of the organization over 25 years ago, and still today, as you know, I'm the executive director of the National Association of Drug Diversion Investigators. So after my law enforcement career and regulatory life, I actually went into private industry and worked for Eli Lilly, where I managed their counterfeit drug investigations in the Americas for over 6 years. So, and all during that period of time, again, I was fortunate enough to be involved with NADDI and involved with their training in the pharmaceutical and drug arena, and with that, the contacts that I made throughout the U.S. With law enforcement, regulatory, and the industry in the pharmaceutical and the pharma world.
Okay, that's neat. It's always interesting to hear how people's journeys take them to where they are now. So the NADDI I didn't realize NADDI had been around that long. I attended NADDI. It was the very first conference I attended that had anything to do with drug diversion, and that was probably about 9 years ago. And I really got a lot out of that conference. It was in the beginning of where I was starting to get involved with drug diversion, and it provided a lot of valuable information for me. I noticed on the website that the mission statement for NADDI is to work in partnership to provide the effective means to encourage learning, advance knowledge, and strengthen prevention practices within our communities. What types of things do you offer your membership that move you toward fulfilling that mission?
Well, as I said, and we did celebrate our 30th anniversary conference in October of 2019. And throughout those 30 years, we began, as I said earlier, as a law enforcement group and training law enforcement. But probably 20 years ago, we started to grow, and I think the organization knew that pharmaceutical abuse and diversion was just not a law enforcement problem. It's a community problem. And that's where we began our partnership with law enforcement, with pharma, that public-private sector that are all involved in pharmaceutical drug abuse and diversion. So that partnership with law enforcement and the private industry, healthcare facility, doctors, nurses, pharmacists, the regulatory community, the pharma industry, I think that's what sets NADDI apart. The collaboration and partnership with law enforcement and the rest of the community that are involved in pharmaceutical drug abuse and diversion. So in fulfilling that mission, we became that training organization that grew 30 years ago from a few hundred law enforcement people sitting in a room talking about cases to now over 4,000 members and 8,000 users on our website who have partnered specifically at our training conferences. We now have 25 chapters in 31 states. We were doing 20 live training conferences a year for the organization, and leading into that mission of that collaboration and partnership with law enforcement and the pharma community, the drug diversion community, the substance abuse community, and as I said, all the healthcare providers that we continue to work with.
Okay, that's great. When I attended quite a few years ago, as I said, I got a lot out of it. I attended more than one, but I do recall it was heavily law enforcement, but I also feel that it was a lot of retail. Is it a correct statement to say you have more focus on retail than hospital pharmacy, or is that no longer the case?
Well, I think the same statement goes. I've heard that NADDI's a law enforcement group. That's all we are. And times change a little bit about what happens in the community, what happens in the U.S. in pharmaceutical drug diversion. There was a time, and probably 10 years ago or even a little bit longer, during the pill mill crisis, where we were seeing more pharmacy robberies and burglaries than bank robberies. So there was a lot more education and training in partnering our law enforcement people with the pharmacy asset and product protection people to talk about pharmacy robberies and burglaries, because those people that were committing those crimes were then diverting those drugs into the street. So there was that issue there that we had to focus on also. So I think, just looking at our membership now, that law enforcement membership still probably is the largest group that we have, 50 to 60%, but the other 40% is that private industry, doctors, nurses, pharmacists, the health facility, nursing home, home health care arena. Again, we still stay in the pharmacy arena for the loss prevention and asset protection people because of pharmacy thefts and addiction, unfortunately, with some of the healthcare professionals and employees of the pharmacies, of course, at the hospitals also. So I think we've evolved over the last 30 years for the better, and the organization has definitely grown during that period of time, and we continue that mission of education and training.
Well, that's great. It's great that the organization grows with what is needed, and drug diversion certainly does touch a lot of different pieces of, as you said, law enforcement, community, hospitals, retail, I mean, and the addicted. So it does touch a lot of people. Do you have any examples of how membership at your organization or attending a conference made a specific difference for an individual or an entity?
Well, I think there are a lot of times during our in-person training conferences that those connections happen. And, I know I've heard stories. Well, I had this case in my county and I needed help from someone in another state. And I used that NADDI membership, and I called someone in that other state, and I got that information within minutes over the phone to help my investigation that I was conducting in my state. I think we have a lot of stories like that. There's a lot of connections that happen, especially during our in-person training conferences, when they're just sitting around at lunch, sitting around during a break, and talking about cases, especially in our state chapter training conferences, where the state people gather together, and somebody from the northern part of the state's talking about a case, and someone from the southern part of the state or from a different county hears about that case and says, wait a minute, I have something really similar to what you're experiencing in your county. And they get their heads together, and unfortunately, or fortunately for us, it's the same perpetrator. It's the same people that may be robbing that pharmacy, may be burglarizing that pharmacy, or may be involved in diverting drugs. And in the healthcare arena, we talk about traveling healthcare providers, traveling nurses, traveling techs, and the same things happens across state lines. Well, I've got something happening in my nursing home that I'm investigating, or something that there's a security director for a hospital talking about his case, and somebody else just hears about that at one of our trainings, says, I I have the exact same thing happening in my investigation. And fortunately for us, they put everything together, and I think that's happened a lot more than once or twice or three or four times for us.
Yeah, no, that's a great example. I mean, we wish nationally we could all connect and so we could hear and then connect those dots, but to at least be able to do it within the organization. And I know for me, when I sit there and I hear people's stories and what they found, it reminds me, oh, have I looked at that potential gap, or that's something to consider that I haven't thought about yet? And so I always leave with, pages of notes of things to just go back and check, or things that maybe I looked at a few years ago and then have forgotten. And then it reminded me, let me make sure that we're still on task with that and still doing what we need to do and haven't drifted. So those are good things. What is your favorite part about the work that you currently do?
I still think it's always about the people that I've met, throughout my 25 plus years with the organization. You think, maybe I've heard everything, or I've heard too many stories, but you still hear something new that's happening out there. There's always, when I say the bad guy, always has something new up his or her sleeve to try to evade law enforcement, security in the hospital, security in a pharmacy, the law. But it's always those connections. I think the people, and I'm fortunate enough to be around this industry for over 25 years, and I've made some extremely great friendships, and friendships that I cherish and still have today.
Excellent. Well, your organization does good work and it's important work. So I'm glad that there are people like you that are doing it. Is there anything else you'd like to share with us about yourself or the work that you do, or do you want to turn the tables and ask me a question?
I thought a little bit about, when we talked about the interview and what the organization does, and really what we didn't do last year, because as I said, our in-person, our live trainings have really been the source of what the organization has done. And due to COVID last year, we did no live trainings. And so we, as an organization, had to change, just like a lot of other organizations, to keep our membership intact, to keep the interest with our membership. So as with many organizations, I guess, webinars became the thing to do. Mm-hmm. And one of the things that we really worked on last year was the NADDI website. And whether you have looked at it, but our learning library that contains numerous webinars, the collection of diversion reports that we have there, the case studies, the security alerts. We even have a book club there now, Diversion. So we kept our membership, and fortunately, our membership really did not decrease during COVID. And, if you attended one of our conferences, you know that membership is always included in attending our training conferences. So we were really discussing on, were we going to lose our members last year during COVID? And fortunately for us, we didn't. Our membership stayed intact. We never lost those 4,000 plus members. They stayed with us, and I think it's our website that kept them there, our learning library, the NADDI News. And fortunately, now we've started in-person trainings in 2021. We hosted our first training in March of last year, our Carolinas training. Typically, that's a training that draws our membership from North Carolina and South Carolina. I think what we learned there, we had 8 different states attending the Carolinas conference. I think that what we learned was that a lot of people were tired of sitting in front of their computer watching webinars, and they wanted to come to a live training. They wanted that interaction with other people that were doing the same thing as they're doing in the diversion world, talking about diversion cases. We have a narcotics conference coming up in 2 weeks in Florida. Fortunately for us, it's sold out. We've sold out a few weeks ago. So it's great. I think what people want, and they want this education. They want to meet with other people that are doing the same thing as they're doing, investigating abuse and diversion of pharmaceutical drugs. So I want to say we're back.
We're back. And I assume that those are some great resources that you have. It's for members only, I'm assuming, the section on your website. And when is your next big annual conference?
Well, there's a lot of information still on our website that's for the public. Now, the webinars that we talked about are just members only. That's a perk of being a member. But I still think there's a lot of information like NADDI News and reports that the public still has access to. The trainings that I talked about, and typically that happens on an annual basis, all lead up to our annual conference, which this year, 2021, it will be live and is in November in Florida.
You'll be live in November in Florida.
It will be, yes. Yes. Definitely right, keeping our fingers crossed. Yeah. We kept looking at that crystal ball all last year, hoping that we could put something together to bring our members, live on a stage. So we're again, just as you said, keeping those fingers crossed, and hopefully we'll have 400 attendees at our national conference in November on St. Pete Beach in Florida. So some of the information is already on our website. And so we hope to see a lot of our members and hopefully you, Terry, down on the beach in Florida.
That sounds great. All right. Well, thank you very much, Charlie, for your time today. I appreciate the time that you've spent with me.
No, thank you, Terry, and thanks for everything you do.